I should have seen the signs from the start, but I was too blinded by love and the promise of a new beginning. The night that was supposed to welcome me into Lyle's family turned into a twisted ambush that left me reeling. It began like any other family dinner, or so I thought. Lyle's son Carter and his mother Evelyn greeted me with thinly veiled disdain as we gathered around the elegantly set table. The tension was palpable, but I brushed it off, determined to win them over with my warm smile and friendly demeanor. "So wonderful to finally have you here as part of the family, Rowan," Evelyn said, her sickly sweet tone dripping with insincerity. Before I could respond, Carter cleared his throat loudly. "Actually, Mother, that's what we need to discuss." He shuffled some papers in front of him dramatically. "We have reason to believe Rowan isn't who she claims to be." My heart dropped to my stomach as Evelyn nodded solemnly. Lyle's brow furrowed in confusion as Carter launched into a diatribe unveiling what he called evidence of my supposed gold-digging ways. Grainy pictures, edited financial statements, and outright lies spilled from his mouth like venom. "You're nothing but a con artist trying to get your hands on my father's hard-earned money," Carter shouted, his face twisted with rage. I opened my mouth to defend myself, but the words stuck in my throat. How could I begin to counter such a twisted web of deceit? I looked to Lyle, desperate for him to see through their darkness, but his expression was clouded with doubt. "Is this true, Rowan?" he asked, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Have you been lying to me this whole time?" Evelyn placed a bony hand on his arm, her lips pursed in feigned concern. "Don't let her work her manipulative charm, dear. We have all the proof we need of her treachery." Anger burned through my disbelief as I watched the man I loved waver under the onslaught of their poisonous lies. This was no welcoming embrace. It was a calculated attempt to drive me out before I could truly become a part of their family. Squaring my shoulders, I met Carter's hateful glare. "You can present all the smoke and mirrors you want, but I know the truth, and so do you." I turned to Lyle, my heart aching at the conflict in his eyes. "If you'll give me a chance, I'll prove to you that your son and mother are weaving a tangled web here. But you need to choose whether you'll trust me or let their falsities blind you." The silence that followed was deafening. In that endless moment, I could see the battle played out on Lyle's face. The war between faith in his family and his feelings for me. I prayed that love would win out, but a knot of dread twisted in my gut, warning me that this was only the beginning of a long and arduous road ahead. The sickening thud of Carter's evidence hitting the table made my stomach churn. I wanted nothing more than to lash out, to scream the truth until they couldn't ignore it any longer. But something held me back, a flicker of self-preservation in the face of their cold deception. "Well?" Carter sneered, chin raised in arrogant challenge. "Aren't you going to try and defend yourself?" I opened my mouth, but Lyle's soft voice cut through the tension. "Maybe. Maybe we should give Rowan a chance to explain." His eyes pleaded with me, desperate to believe his family was still intact. Evelyn instantly pounced. "Oh, Lyle, don't be so naive. This woman has clearly clouded your judgment with her wiles." Her bony fingers closed around his wrist in a vice-like grip. "She needs to go before she bleeds you dry." "You shut your mouth!" I exploded, hands balling into fists. "How dare you stand here and peddle these ridiculous lies?" Lyle flinched, and in that moment, a flicker of doubt crossed his features. That was all the seed Carter and Evelyn needed to uproot everything we'd built. Clenching my jaw, I threw my napkin onto the plate and pushed away from the table. "Fine. If you're both too blinded by your prejudice to see the truth, then I'll just have to show you." The days that followed were utter torment. I spent every waking moment analyzing their fraudulent evidence, searching for even the slightest flaw to unravel. Pictures with doctored dates, bank statements showing money trails that didn't exist. It was as if they'd tried to fabricate an entire alternate life for me. But the more lies I uncovered, the more fuel I had to fight back. I started documenting every interaction, every suspicious phone call or grimace exchanged when they thought I wasn't looking. I pored over Lyle's financial statements, searching for anything that could prove Carter's deception. It was tedious, mind-numbing work, made all the more draining by Lyle's increasing distance. He went through the motions with me, but I could see the internal battle raging behind his eyes every time Carter or Evelyn were around. Then one night, I struck gold. Flipping through a stack of expenditure reports, I found an itemized invoice for materials that should have been allocated to one of Carter's construction projects. But the numbers didn't add up. They were thousands over budget, with the excess funneled into an account I didn't recognize. My heart raced as I cross-referenced it against other documents, the full scope of Carter's treachery taking shape. I didn't have concrete proof yet, but I could see the beginnings of his long con, a way to siphon funds from the company without Lyle knowing. I wanted to rush to Lyle that second, to finally unveil the depth of Carter's lies. But something made me pause. If I took this evidence straight to him now, would he even believe me? Or would Evelyn's poisonous words once again cloud his judgment? No, this time I needed an ally. Someone who could help me put the final pieces together and show Lyle the entire truth in one devastating blow. I needed to remove any shred of doubt before ripping the veil from his eyes. My thoughts turned to Dina, Lyle's long-suffering secretary who always seemed to be in Carter's crosshairs. I recalled the subtle grimaces and sidelong glances whenever his name came up. If anyone else could see through his deceit, it would be her. Clutching the damning paperwork to my chest, I felt a renewed sense of determination burn through me. I would bring Carter's twisted web crashing down, and woe to anyone who stood in my way. I approached Dina's desk with trepidation, the incriminating papers feeling like lead weights in my hands. Her face was locked in its usual polite mask, but I caught the briefest flicker of recognition in her eyes as she noticed me. "Rowan," she said evenly, setting down her pen. "What can I do for you?" My mouth was dry as I leaned in close, dropping my voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "I need to know if you've noticed anything unusual going on with Carter lately." Dina's perfectly arched brows rose a fraction, but she didn't respond. I pressed on, taking a risk by handing her the invoice with the questionable money trail. This is just one example, but I think there's more going on behind the scenes, something bigger that Carter's trying to hide. For a long moment, Dina simply stared at the document, her expression unreadable. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded, a wordless acknowledgement that cracked open the door I'd been seeking. "You're not the only one who's had suspicions," she murmured, glancing furtively around the empty office before reaching into her desk drawer. She pulled out a slim manila folder, its edges slightly frayed, and handed it to me. "I started compiling this a few months ago when irregularities started showing up in the books." My heart raced as I opened the folder, revealing a meticulously organized cache of damning evidence against Carter. Redirected money flows, overcharged invoices, even misappropriated equipment rentals, all linking back to the same shadowy account. "You've been watching him too," I breathed, feeling the first stirrings of vindication as the full picture started taking shape. "Why didn't you say anything sooner?" Dina's gaze slid sideways, a rueful twist to her lips. "And risk the Donovan family wrath? Carter's made it very clear over the years that he calls the shots around here, even a whisper of disloyalty." She trailed off with a shrug, my hands unconsciously curled into fists at her words. So this was how Carter had managed to spin his tangled web for so long, through intimidation and implied threats against anyone who dared point out his misdeeds. Just like he'd tried to do to me at that fateful family dinner. No wonder Dina had kept her findings buried. Going up against the Donovan Empire alone would have been career suicide at best. But now, with both our evidence combined, "You know what this means," I said, clutching the folder to my chest like a lifeline. "We finally have the proof to expose Carter and bring his whole twisted scheme crumbling down." A flicker of doubt crossed Dina's features. "Are you sure that's wise? The last thing we need is to provoke the family's wrath if we don't have an ironclad case." "Of course I'm sure." My jaw set in grim determination. "They've already tried to destroy me once with manufactured lies. Well, now it's time to show them what the truth really looks like." Dina held my gaze for a beat, then gave a solemn nod of solidarity. "Whatever you need, I'm in. That bastard's had this coming for a long time." A feral smile tugged at the corners of my lips as the first crucial ally joined my ranks. Carter and Evelyn's tangled web was unraveling, and this time, they were the ones about to get caught in its snare. With Dina as my co-conspirator, everything started moving at a dizzying pace. We pored over the evidence, connecting dots and constructing an airtight case to present to Lyle. I could feel the moment of vindication drawing closer with every damning document we uncovered. Carter's arrogance had been his undoing, the money trails too numerous and sloppy to completely cover up. Now we just needed the perfect moment to spring the trap and blind him with the truth before he could slither his way out. That moment came one sunny Sunday afternoon when I casually mentioned wanting to have a family dinner. A family dinner? Evelyn's eyes narrowed with thinly veiled contempt. Why on earth would you want to subject yourself to that again after last time? Oh, I have my reasons, I replied airily, keeping my expression neutral. Just thought it might be nice to get everyone together, clear the air and all that. Lyle looked skeptical, but Carter just scoffed. You must be joking. Like we'd willingly let a viper into our nest again after you almost tore this family apart. I leveled him with a look that stopped him in his tracks. Believe me, Carter, the only viper here has already been living amongst you for quite some time. The weighted silence that followed was deliciously tense. Carter opened his mouth, no doubt to unleash another torrent of vitriol, but I didn't give him the chance. The dinner's happening, I stated flatly. Either you'll be there, or Lyle and I will finally get the full truth about what's really been going on under his nose. Carter's face mottled with rage, but a quick, panicked glance at his mother made him snap his jaw shut. Lyle looked utterly bewildered by the entire exchange. What's she talking about? He asked, turning to his son with a perplexed frown. If you two know something, you better start explaining right now. Don't worry, dear, Evelyn cooed, placing a placating hand on his arm in that sickeningly patronizing way of hers. I'm sure it's just more of Rowan's hysterics. You know how dramatic she can be. Liar. My nails dug into my palms as I fought to keep my expression impassive. Believe what you want for now. But this dinner is happening, and by the end of it, you'll both finally get exactly what you deserve. The weighted promise in my tone seemed to give them pause. For a fraction of a second, a sliver of uncertainty cracked their united front. Good. They should be worried. The night of the fateful dinner arrived with an almost palpable tension. Dina arrived early to help set up, the folder containing our meticulously compiled case tucked securely under her arm. Carter and Evelyn swept in like royalty, displeased at having to mingle with the peasants. Their haughty disdain was practically tangible as they eyed the spread of food in prepared places at the table. Is this really necessary? Evelyn hissed under her breath as Lyle greeted her with an awkward peck on the cheek. Just play along for now, Mother, Carter muttered back, shooting me a look of pure loathing. She's up to something, but we'll handle it. Famous last words. I met his glare steadily, letting my gaze convey the confidence I felt. Thanks to Dina's inside knowledge and relentless digging, there wasn't a single thread of their rotten scheme that we didn't have documented proof of. They could posture and sneer all they wanted, but this time there would be no more lies, no more smokescreens to hide behind. By the end of this night, Carter and Evelyn's entire web of deceit was going to come crashing down around them in front of the only person whose opinion truly mattered. Lyle. The trap was set. All that was left was for the snakes to finally get a taste of their own venom. The tension was so thick at that dinner table, you could have cut it with a knife. Carter and Evelyn kept shooting me furtive glances, like they expected me to launch some dramatic outburst at any moment. If only they knew. Dina gave me the slightest of nods as she refilled Lyle's water glass, the folder with our compiled evidence burning a hole against her side. I forced myself to keep my expression neutral as I calmly cut into my food. I began conversationally after taking a bite, I've been doing a lot of thinking about that little intervention stunt you two tried to pull a while back. Evelyn's hand stilled, her fork hovering in the air. Carter shot me a look of pure venom that barely concealed the fear flickering in his eyes. What about it? He bit out through gritted teeth. I watched Lyle's confused frown deepen out of the corner of my eye. Yeah, Rowan, I thought we'd move past all that unpleasantness. Unpleasantness? I echoed, fixing him with a pointed stare. That's one way to describe your own flesh and blood conspiring to sabotage your happiness with manipulated lies and fraud, I suppose. Carter opened his mouth furiously, but I pressed on before he could interrupt. Tell me, Lyle, how much do you actually know about your businesses, finances, about the investments and expenditures Carter's been overseeing in your name? Lyle visibly faltered, confusion and discomfort written plainly across his features. Evelyn saw her chance and attempted her usual placating spin. Honestly, dear, she's just trying to stir up more trouble. No, I want to hear this, Lyle stated firmly, his jaw set as he turned back towards me with renewed determination. Carter shifted in his seat, clearly unnerved by his father's uncharacteristic defiance. What's she talking about, Dad? Everything I've done has been to protect your life's work. By embezzling funds into your own secret slush account, you mean? Dina's soft voice cut through the tension like a whip crack. All eyes swiveled towards her as she finally set the innocuous manila folder down on the table and slid it towards Lyle. I started compiling these financial discrepancies a few months ago when things stopped adding up. Rowan and I have spent the last several weeks putting together this case to expose Carter's treachery once and for all. Dead silence fell over the table as Lyle slowly pulled the folder across the tablecloth towards him. Carter's complexion had taken on a sickly gray pallor, his features twisting in fury and panic. You're going to take the word of these two lying. Look at the evidence, Carter, I growled, leaning across the table to glare at him. Look at the paper trail of your own misdeeds and try to deny it to his face one more time. Don't you dare speak to my son that way. Evelyn's shrill voice pierced the air, her skeletal frame trembling in outrage. He's done nothing but protect this family from grifters like you trying to worm your way in. Mother, please. Carter's anguished voice cracked like a plea as Lyle began flipping through page after damning page of compiled proof. The lies and deception were all there, laid bare under the unforgiving light of facts and figures. Every manipulated invoice, every suspicious asset transfer, every skimmed deposit into a shell corporation that was clearly Carter's own private cash cow. It was all right there, plain as day, for Lyle to finally see with his own eyes. Silence stretched out like an icy void as the last document slipped from Lyle's fingers onto the table with a sense of finality. No one dared breathe for fear of shattering the fragility of that moment. Then, at long last, Lyle raised his head to fix his son with a look that combined equal parts devastation and resolve. "Get out," he rasped, the words trembling despite their quiet delivery. "Both of you. I don't want to look at either of you until I've had time to decide how to untangle this catastrophe." The devastation on Carter's face would have been almost pitiable if I'd felt even an ounce of sympathy left for him. As for Evelyn, her cheeks had flushed an ugly mottled red, all traces of her feigned gentility vanishing beneath sheer unbridled rage. But I didn't give them a chance to protest. I simply met their incandescent glares with a look of cold satisfaction. You heard him. Your lies and treachery have gone on long enough. Now it's time to face the consequences. The aftermath of that fateful dinner was like a bomb going off in our lives. Carter and Evelyn were forced to slink away in disgrace, spitting vile curses and threats of retaliation that rang hollow even to their own ears. I won't lie, seeing the devastated look in Lyle's eyes as he confronted the horrific betrayal of his own flesh and blood carved out a piece of my soul. He was a good man who had placed blind faith in his family, only to have it shattered in the ugliest way imaginable. But I refused to let that guilt consume me. Not after everything Carter and Evelyn had put us through with their lies and deceptions. This was their mess to untangle, not mine. In the days that followed, Lyle retreated into himself, grappling with the fallout as I did what I could to facilitate a full financial audit and legal investigation. Dina stuck by my side, her steadfast loyalty more invaluable than ever, as we attempted to calculate just how deep the rabbit hole of corruption went. The numbers were staggering. Millions siphoned away into offshore accounts, assets transferred and liquidated under the table, even kickbacks and bribes to contractors playing both sides. It made me sick just looking at the meticulously documented evidence of Carter's underhanded scheming. "I can't believe I let this go on for so long," Lyle muttered hoarsely one evening, the stark shadows under his eyes a testament to his torment. How could I have been so blind? Dina and I exchanged a loaded glance, but stayed silent. What could we possibly say to ease the crushing weight of that guilt? That he'd simply wanted to see the best in his own child, instead of looking for deception at every turn? In the end, I settled for placing a comforting hand over his, giving it a reassuring squeeze. What matters now is that we know the full truth, and we're going to make damn sure Carter faces the consequences for every bent penny. The hard glint that entered Lyle's eye in that moment was like a rebirth. The good man I loved finally emerging from the ashes of betrayal to reclaim what was his. We hit Carter with everything we had, the full force of our documented evidence, ironclad legal filings, and every resource at our disposal to dismantle his web of fraud piece by agonizing piece. Lyle was like a man possessed, turning all his energy and determination towards ripping apart the facade his son had so carefully constructed. And like the coward he was, Carter did his best to slither away and avoid responsibility. He denied everything at first, deflecting blame and lashing out with bitter, hateful diatribes about ungrateful parasites overthrowing his rightful dynasty. But we were prepared. I made sure Dina and I had receipts for every shady transaction, every manipulated document, every crooked insider deal. With our combined arsenals, we battered down Carter's crumbling defenses with the cold, brutal inevitability of the truth. He couldn't spin or bluster his way out of this one. As his options dwindled and the noose drew tighter, I could almost see the realization dawning in his beady eyes that this was really happening. That his lifetime of underhanded greed and nepotism had finally caught up to him, and there was no way to avoid the reckoning he'd brought upon himself. He lashed out at me then, in one final desperate attempt to regain control. Rained down a torrent of vitriol about how I'd wormed my way into Lyle's life with my duplicitous scheming, sowing the seeds that led to this. How I was the one who had shattered their once perfect family unit by planting doubts and turning father against son. I'll admit, part of me was tempted to rise to the bait, to hurl his own sins back in his face and drown him in the truth he so desperately tried to avoid. But one look at the resolute determination shining in Lyle's eyes stayed my tongue. In the end, I didn't need to say a word. Carter's desperation and bitter raving spoke volumes about his own guilt, and as the law enforcers finally led him away in handcuffs, I locked eyes with the sad, broken man who had once arrogantly tried to bring me down and felt nothing. No triumph, no smug satisfaction, just a cold, implacable sense of justice being served. His day in court was still to come, but in that moment, I knew Carter's pathetic ability to manipulate and deceive had finally met its match. The veil had been ripped away once and for all, and all his malice and cruelty lay exposed, rotting in the light of day. And I was just getting started. The day of Carter's trial was like a reckoning, years in the making. We'd thoroughly documented and evidenced every shady dealing, every underhanded scheme, leaving no room for his lawyers to squirm through loopholes or manipulations. He tried, of course, launching into a barrage of half-truths and feeble justifications about simply protecting his family's legacy whenever given the chance. But the prosecution's case was too ironclad, the money trails too damning to be obscured by his usual bravado. I'll never forget the look of slack-jawed shock on Carter's face as witness after witness took the stand to corroborate the extent of his fraud. Contractors, accountants, even other relatives and employees, one by one, they all raised their hands and swore to tell the truth about the rot festering at the heart of the Donovan Company. With each new layer of depravity and deception laid bare, I could see him wilt a little more under the harsh courtroom lights. His overstuffed suit started hanging looser, his perpetual sneer turning into a haggard grimace of disbelief. For so long, Carter had coasted through life on unearned privilege and the ability to bully his way through any situation. But finally, after decades of unchecked greed, his freewheeling days were crashing to a halt. And I was there for every agonizing second of it. My own testimony on the stand was revelatory. I held nothing back as I calmly, methodically deconstructed the litany of threats, manipulations, and outright criminal behavior that had been leveraged against me. Document after document, email after communication log, it all painted a vivid portrait of the vendetta Carter had nursed to defend his fragile ego and ill-gotten riches. So let me get this straight, the prosecutor stated, pacing in front of the jurors. You're telling us that this man, Carter Donovan, went to deplorable lengths to sabotage your character and force you away from his father, all because he viewed your relationship as a threat to his continued embezzlement and profiting off his own family's company? I leveled my gaze directly at Carter, who could only glower impotently back at me. That's correct. The evidence shows that the moment Lyle and I became serious and he expressed a desire to reevaluate the company's finances, Carter panicked. He knew I was a liability who could expose his schemes, so he did everything possible to discredit and turn me against the man I loved, up to and including falsifying documents to paint me as a gold digger. The words hung in the air like a lead weight, impossible for even Carter's paid mouthpieces to refute. The prosecutor's eyes glinted with satisfaction. I see. No further questions. His testimony in his own defense was equally disastrous. Gone was the arrogant bluster, replaced by stammered half-statements and flustered dodges. Every time he tried to deflect or inject doubt, the prosecution was there with ironclad receipts and witnesses to shut him down. And through it all, Evelyn sat in the front row, back ramrod straight, glowering at anyone who dared glance her way. Her refusal to take the stand or testify on her son's behalf said everything about how deep her own complicity ran. It seemed she was more than happy to let Carter take the full force of the law's wrath, as long as she could remain untouched, on the sidelines. The guilty verdict on dozens of charges felt almost anticlimactic by the time it arrived. A petulant scowl was all Carter could muster as he was remanded into custody, finally being forced to answer for his litany of misdeeds. True justice would still have to wait for sentencing, but it didn't matter. His reputation and hubris had already been ripped apart and laid bare over the course of the bombshell trial. There would be no coming back, no opportunity to try and slither out of the path of his own karma. As the courtroom cleared out in a daze, Lyle caught my eye from across the gallery. 1,000 unspoken emotions seemed to pass between us in that moment: loss, vindication, and most of all, sheer overwhelming relief. It was finally over. The dark stain that had poisoned his family, his life's work, could finally be expunged, knowing that the worst of the rot had been carved out for good. I gave him the slightest nod of acknowledgement, a promise that the worst was behind us, that from here we could begin scripting a new, better chapter, one where truth and loyalty wouldn't just be espoused as values, they'd finally become our reality. With Carter's sentencing finally handed down, it was like a weight had been lifted off Lyle and me. 25 years for fraud, embezzlement, and a laundry list of other white-collar crimes. Not that anyone was shocked by the lengthy term. I'd made sure the prosecution went for the jugular, determined not to let a single misdeed slide after the hell he'd put us through. Evelyn had distanced herself completely by that point, no doubt hoping her refusal to get tangled in the legal drama would insulate her from any association. She maintained her usual frosty silence whenever Lyle or I were around, like an iceberg too proud to acknowledge the wreckage it had caused. For my part, I didn't give her the satisfaction of acknowledgement. I'd done what I set out to, exposed the truth, and made sure those responsible for shredding it paid the price. If she wanted to live out her remaining years cocooned in denial and bitterness, that was her choice. My focus had shifted to helping Lyle put the pieces back together. With Carter's stranglehold on the company finally broken, we were free to enact the accounting practices and financial transparencies I'd been advocating for from the start. It was slow, meticulous work, undoing decades of obfuscation and misdirection, but I took a sort of grim satisfaction in righting those wrongs. We had to let some people go, of course, individuals who had been too deeply entrenched in Carter's web to be trustworthy anymore. Their outraged protests fell on deaf ears as we tightened the ship, promoting loyal staffers like Dina to shore up key operational roles. Dina, she really was invaluable during those rebuilding months. Her calmly assured manner and keen financial mind helped steady the course as we righted the listing ship. There was a stretch where I wondered if the stress of it all was going to push the usually stoic woman over the edge. But she merely clenched her jaw tighter and powered through, as dependable as ever. At the end of a particularly grueling Friday, I caught her alone in her office, looking worn down in a way I'd never seen before. "You okay?" I asked, hovering in the doorway. She flashed me a tight smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Just feeling a bit of whiplash, I suppose, still processing the reality of everything that's happened. We lapsed into a heavy silence, both of us no doubt replaying the insanity of recent months in our minds. Somehow, airing the truth and securing Carter's downfall had been the easy part. Now came the true labor of rebuilding and establishing a company culture that would never allow those betrayals to take root again. You know? Dina spoke up abruptly. For what it's worth, I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner about my suspicions. If I had, maybe things wouldn't have spiraled the way they did. I shook my head firmly. Don't do that to yourself. What matters is you stood up when it really counted. Hell, if it wasn't for you, I might never have gotten all the proof I needed to pierce that bastard's armor. Dina's mouth twitched in a rueful half-smile. Still, after all this, I think it's time I start looking out for the little guy around here more often. All this a them, eat them too mentality Carter brought. Well, maybe with him out of the way, we can finally change the narrative. My eyebrows rose in surprise at her newfound verve. For someone who had endured the company politics in stoic silence for years, this sounded like the start of a true awakening. I was about to respond when Lyle appeared in the doorway, that small, contented smile I loved so much gracing his features. There you two are. His eyes crinkled warmly, the stresses of the past months seeming to melt off his shoulders. I was thinking we could all go out for dinner tonight, a little celebration at finally putting all this ugliness behind us. I glanced back at Dina, saw the same sense of purpose reflected in her gaze, and grinned. I'd say that's an excellent idea. As I let Lyle take my hand and lead us out towards a hard-earned new beginning, I permitted myself a fleeting glance over my shoulder. The office, and the dark legacy it had represented for so long, was finally receding into the rear view, cleared of its malignant influences. It was a fresh start for all of us, a chance to rewrite the narrative and establish a brighter way forward, forged from the ashes of deception and frayed family ties. Most importantly, it was a promise that truth and integrity would finally take precedence, without any room for poisonous shadows to take root. No matter what lay ahead, I knew one thing for certain. As I stepped out into that brilliant spring evening, we would never let those virtues be shaken again.